In the heart of a blinding Michigan thunderstorm, a sheriff's deputy and her loyal K-9 partner are left for dead. They are brutally beaten, poisoned, and chained to a cold, rusting tower. Life is draining out of them with every gust of wind-driven rain. Seconds from being erased by the storm, a lone Navy SEAL, a man seeking only quiet, discovers a horrific scene that plunges him into a conspiracy he cannot ignore. Because this was no random act of violence. This was the beginning of a ghost's revenge. The Upper Peninsula in the fall is a contradiction, a place of two faces. Down in the tourist towns, it's a postcard of warmth and comfort, where golden light spills from the windows of cozy diners and lakeside lodges, illuminating streets filled with laughter. But out in these forgotten state forests, it is another world entirely. A world that is wild, raw, and unforgiving. The storm hit without warning, a furious gray curtain that erased the line between sky and earth. The rain didn't fall, it assaulted, driven sideways by winds that howled like hungry wolves. For Jack Corrigan, this was the quiet he craved. A Navy SEAL on a rare leave, he sought the harsh, clean truth of the wilderness to wash away the grime of his last deployment. He was a man of lean muscle and a quiet, steady intensity, his face weathered by desert suns, his sharp blue eyes accustomed to scanning empty horizons, not stands of snow-dusted pine. At 32, his every movement was an economy of motion, speaking to years of disciplined training. Each step he took on the muddy trail was deliberate and sure. The wind tore at his thermal layers, the cold a familiar bite. Peace, he thought, wasn't the absence of a fight, but finding clarity within it. The fight here was simple, him against the forest, him against the storm. No hidden agendas, no shifting allegiances, just the cold, raw truth of survival. He was cutting across a ridge overlooking an abandoned logging trail, a ghost of Michigan's past. The path was nearly invisible, marked only by the skeletal remains of old trail signs half swallowed by the undergrowth. That's when he heard it, a sound that didn't belong. It wasn't the shriek of the wind or the groan of branches under the weight of the rain. The sound was low, guttural, and thick with an almost human pain. A sound of desperate defiance being swallowed by the storm. Jack froze, his body instantly on high alert. Trained instinct took over, his senses sharpening to a razor's edge. He scanned the landscape, his gaze piercing the swirling sheets of rain. The sound came again, weaker this time, from the base of a massive steel structure some 50 yards down the slope. It was an old fire watchtower, a monument of rust and peeling paint, its lookout cabin long since collapsed. A relic from another time. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. He moved from his position, descending the slope with a speed and silence that defied the treacherous conditions. As he got closer, the scene resolved from a blur of gray and brown into a nightmare. It was a dog, a magnificent German shepherd, its powerful frame slumped against the cold steel of the tower. Its thick black and tan coat was matted with ice and something darker that steamed faintly in the cold. But it wasn't the blood that caught Jack's attention. It was the heavy-duty industrial chain cinched through the animal's collar to a metal strut on the tower, wrenching its head back at an unnatural angle. The dog saw him approach, and the low growl rumbled in its chest again, a fading, final warning from a loyal protector. Then Jack saw what it was guarding. Leaning against the other side of the strut was a woman. She was chained to the steel structure with the same ruthless efficiency, her arms wrenched behind her. She wore the tattered remains of a Marquette County Sheriff's winter uniform. Her face, framed by dark hair frozen to her skin, was a canvas of livid bruises. Her lips were a deathly blue, the telltale sign of cyanosis from severe hypothermia. A horrifying, thin line of foam clung to the corner of her mouth. This was Deputy Elena Ramirez. Jack didn't know her name yet, but he recognized the local department's uniform. She was in her late 20s, with strong features that, even in unconsciousness, spoke of a fierce determination. She was a fighter, but she was losing. Jack's mind became a machine of cold, clear logic. The triage thinking of a SEAL kicked in: assess, prioritize, act. He dropped his pack in the mud, his movement swift and precise. "Easy, boy," he murmured to the dog, his voice a low, steady calm that cut through the chaos of the wind. "I'm here to help." He drew a tactical knife from the sheath on his belt. The blade severed the thick leather of the dog's collar in one smooth motion. The shepherd, released from the strain, collapsed into the mud with a weak whine, its amber eyes never leaving the woman. Jack was already at her side. He used bolt cutters from his pack to snap the chains, catching her limp body before she could fall. He carefully lowered her to the ground, using his own body to shield her from the worst of the wind. His fingers, bare and nimble despite the cold, went straight to her neck, searching for a pulse. He found one, thready and intermittent. Her breathing was just as shallow, a barely perceptible flutter. He lifted one of her eyelids. Her pupils were constricted to pinpoints. Poison, a neurotoxin by the look of it. The beating was to disable. The poison and the cold were to kill. Not today, he whispered, the words a promise. From his pack, he pulled a Mylar survival blanket, its crinkling loud in the muted landscape. He wrapped it tightly around her, his movements efficient and practiced. He knew it wasn't enough. The blanket would only trap what little body heat she had left. She needed external warmth, and she needed it now. Without a second's hesitation, he lay down in the mud beside her, pulling her close, pressing his own body against hers, transferring his own life-sustaining heat into her frozen form. He then draped the rest of the blanket over them both. It was a profoundly intimate act, born of pure medical necessity. He reached for the dog, gently pulling the large animal closer until it was pressed against the deputy's other side. A living, if weak, furnace. The dog seemed to understand, letting out a soft sigh and nudging its head against her hand. With one hand free, Jack unzipped a chest pouch and pulled out a small, rugged satellite phone. He flipped it open and hit a single pre-programmed number. The call connected almost instantly. Corrigan here, he said, his voice flat, devoid of panic. I have an officer down. Repeat, officer down. I'm on the west face of Sugarloaf Mountain, abandoned fire watchtower. Coordinates to follow. I have 2 victims, 1 female deputy, 1 K9. Both with severe hypothermia, blunt force trauma, and suspected neurotoxin exposure. Both are alive, but vitals are critical. I need immediate air evac with advanced medical support. The storm is worsening. You have a 30-minute window. Acknowledge? He rattled off the GPS coordinates from his watch, his words sharp and clear. After receiving confirmation, he ended the call. Now came the hardest part, the wait. He held the deputy, murmuring to her. Not words, just reassuring sounds, the way one might soothe a startled animal. Hang on. Help is coming. Just hang on. He could feel the life in her, a tiny, stubborn spark fighting against the overwhelming cold. The dog, Ragnar, whined softly again, its warm breath fogging on the woman's frozen cheek. A connection was still there, a bond that even this brutal assault couldn't completely sever. Minutes passed like centuries. The world was nothing but the howl of the wind and the faint, failing rhythm under his fingertips. Then, through the rage of the storm, a new sound emerged. Faint at first, then growing stronger. Whump, 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 whump. The rhythmic, life-saving beat of helicopter blades fighting their way through the tempest. Hope was on the wind. The world came back to Jack in a chaotic rush of sound and motion. The blades of the helicopter beat a desperate rhythm against the storm as flight medics worked furiously in the cramped space. Jack watched, his role as a field savior now over, replaced by the organized urgency of professional rescuers. He kept his eyes on Deputy Ramirez, her form small and still under layers of thermal blankets and medical equipment. Her life was a guttering flame, and this helicopter was a fragile hand cupped around it. They touched down on the helipad atop Marquette General Hospital, where an emergency team was already waiting, their faces grim against the driving rain. The handoff was a fluid blur of motion as Elena was rushed inside, while Ragnar was carefully lifted onto a separate gurney by animal control officers. A man in a sheriff's uniform met them at the door. His presence was a small island of calm in the storm of activity. This was Sheriff Brody Wallace. He was a man in his 50s with a face that looked as though it had been carved from the same rugged mountains that surrounded his county. His clear, gray eyes held the weary patience of a man who had seen too much but still refused to look away. A slightly worn brown Stetson sat on his head, not as a prop, but as if it were part of him. You the one who called it in? Wallace's voice was a low, gravelly thing, steady and sure. Jack Corrigan, Jack replied, his own voice hoarse from the cold. I was hiking the old trail. You did good work, Mr. Corrigan. Damn good, Wallace said, his gaze following the gurney as it disappeared through a set of double doors. Now I need you to tell me everything. Inside the trauma bay, the world had shrunk to the rhythmic beeping of monitors and the clipped, urgent voices of the medical team. Elena Ramirez's life was now a series of numbers on a screen. Her heart rhythm was erratic, her blood pressure dangerously low. A team of doctors and nurses moved around her with practiced efficiency, a desperate ballet to pull her back from the brink. The poison was the real enemy, an invisible assassin coursing through her veins, shutting down her body's systems one by one. At a small, sterile veterinary clinic on the other side of town, Ragnar was fighting his own battle. The clinic belonged to Dr. Sam Gable, a man who seemed more comfortable in the quiet company of animals than in the complicated world of people. He was tall and lean, with a gentle demeanor that could soothe the most frightened creature. His wire-rimmed glasses were constantly sliding down his nose, and his hands, though large, were deft and careful as they worked. "Easy now, big fella," Sam whispered, running a hand along Ragnar's flank. The German Shepherd lay on the steel examination table, breathing shallowly, an IV drip already in his leg. The physical injuries were bad, deep bruising and a few lacerations, but it was the pinpoint constriction of the pupils that worried Sam the most. He'd seen the preliminary report from the hospital. Whatever was used on the deputy was used on him, too. As he carefully cleaned a cut near the dog's shoulder, his fingers brushed against something hard and small just beneath the skin. It wasn't a cyst or a tumor. It was smooth, oblong, and felt distinctly artificial. Frowning, he fetched a handheld scanner from a nearby shelf. He waved it over the area. A low beep confirmed his suspicion. A microchip. That was standard for police K9s. But when the ID number flashed on the screen, Sam paused. The alphanumeric string was unlike any standard registry he had ever seen. It was longer, more complex, and followed a protocol he didn't recognize. This wasn't a run-of-the-mill chip. This was something else entirely, something old. Back at the sheriff's department, the smell of old coffee and wet wool filled the small office. Jack sat across from Sheriff Wallace, recounting the events on the mountain. He spoke with the detached precision of a man reporting facts, leaving emotion out of it. The restraints were heavy-duty transport chains, not something you buy at a hardware store, Jack explained. And the knots, they were tied with a specific type of constrictor hitch. It's designed to tighten with movement. The more they struggled, the tighter the chains would have become. Wallace leaned forward, his tired eyes sharp with focus. "You're saying this wasn't random?" "Nothing about this was random, Sheriff," Jack said, his voice low. "The beating was methodical enough to incapacitate, not kill outright. The location, high on the mountain during a storm, using an abandoned landmark. The attacker knew the area, and they knew the storm was their ally. They weren't just trying to kill them. They wanted them to die slowly, to be erased." A young deputy knocked and entered, his face pale. "Sheriff, the hospital just called. Deputy Ramirez is stable, for now. They've countered the respiratory paralysis, but her heart is failing. They said the toxin is aggressive. It's metamorphic. They've never seen anything like it." Wallace ran a hand over his face, the weight of the situation deepening the lines around his eyes. A highly skilled attacker, a phantom poison, and a case that was rapidly escalating beyond the scope of a small-town police force. He looked at the quiet, intense man across from him, a man who saw things others missed. "Mr. Corrigan," Wallace said slowly. "Your official leave. How long does it last?" Jack met his gaze, a silent understanding passing between them. "It's flexible, Sheriff." Just then, the phone on Wallace's desk rang again. He listened for a moment, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Dr. Gable, what is it? A microchip? What do you mean it's not standard?" He listened, his expression shifting from confusion to alarm. He scribbled the long string of numbers and letters onto a notepad. "All right, Sam, just keep the dog there. Don't let anyone near him. I'm on my way." He hung up and stared at the strange code on the paper. It looked more like a password than an ID. He pushed the pad across the desk to Jack. "The vet just found this chip implanted in the K9, Wallace said. He says it's old tech, maybe military. Does it mean anything to you?" Jack looked at the code. The blood in his veins went cold. He had seen a similar string before, a long time ago, in a classified briefing about decommissioned Black Ops programs that were supposed to be buried and forgotten. The code began with the letter Sir, for Cerberus. The silence in the ICU was a living thing. It was made of the soft whisper of machines, the faint rustle of starched sheets, and the almost inaudible sigh of the ventilator that was breathing for Elena Ramirez. For 2 days, she had been trapped in the gray twilight between worlds, her body waging a silent war against an enemy it couldn't see. Then, a flicker. Her eyelids trembled. The world came into focus, not as a clear picture, but as a series of disconnected sensations. The antiseptic smell of the hospital. The rough texture of the blanket against her cheek. The rhythmic beep that was both irritating and somehow reassuring. She was floating in a fog of memory, trying to grasp at smoke. There was rain, so much cold, biting rain, the brutal impact of a fist against her jaw. Ragnar's furious growl cut short by a sickening thud. But beneath the pain and the cold, there were other fragments, a smell, not of the forest or the rain. It was sharp, sterile, like the air after a lightning strike, The scent of ozone, and a voice. It was a man's, a low baritone that resonated in the chest. It wasn't angry or panicked. It was calm, measured, and terrifyingly familiar. The voice spoke words she couldn't form, but its tone echoed deep in her bones, a cold reverberation from a past she couldn't place. Her eyes snapped open. A nurse with a kind, round face and neatly pinned hair was checking her foreline. The nurse, whose name tag read Maria, gave a small start. "Deputy Ramirez, can you hear me?" Maria's voice was gentle. "Don't try to speak. Just blink if you understand." Elena blinked. The effort was monumental. "Good. Very good," Maria soothed. "You're at Marquette General Hospital. You're safe." Safe. The word felt alien. As Maria went to fetch the doctor, Sheriff Wallace stepped in, his Stetson held respectfully in his hands. He looked 2 days older, the lines on his face etched deeper with worry and lack of sleep. He stood by her bedside, his presence a solid, comforting weight in the room. "Elena," he said softly, "we're damn glad to have you back. Don't push yourself. Is there anything you remember?" She tried to speak, her throat raw. Only a hoarse rasp emerged. She shook her head in frustration, then stopped. She held up one finger, her eyes pleading with him to understand. A voice, she mouthed the words like a silent prayer. And a smell, like lightning. Wallace nodded slowly, his expression grim. It wasn't much, but it was a start. It was more than they had before. Across town, in the quiet sanctuary of his clinic, Dr. Sam Gable was performing a delicate kind of digital surgery. He had isolated the strange microchip from Ragnar, who was now resting comfortably in a large kennel, his strength slowly returning. The chip was a small black sliver of epoxy and silicon, devoid of any manufacturer's marks. It was old, maybe a decade or more, using a specialized data recovery rig, a device he normally used to pull information from the damaged chips of rescued animals. Sam carefully interfaced with the device. For hours, he got nothing but encrypted gibberish. It was like trying to open a bank vault with a paperclip. But Sam was patient. He saw it as a puzzle, a silent story waiting to be told. He tried a different approach, running a diagnostic to bypass the encryption and look for a root identifier, a digital fingerprint. His screen filled with cascading lines of code. Then, after one last, desperate command, something broke through. A single line of stark white text appeared against the black background. ID designate, K9 Asset 07. Project. Code name, Cerberus. Sam leaned back, his glasses sliding down his nose. Cerberus, it sounded like something out of myth. He picked up his phone, his gentle hands trembling slightly. The call came as Jack Corrigan and Sheriff Wallace were in his office, a makeshift war room of maps, whiteboards, and half-drunk cups of coffee. The partnership between the two men had solidified over the last 48 hours into a grudging mutual respect. Wallace, the seasoned lawman, provided the local knowledge and official authority. Jack, the SEAL, provided a perspective on violence and tradecraft that was chillingly effective. They were two sides of the same coin, both dedicated to finding justice, though their methods were worlds apart. Wallace put the phone on speaker. "What have you got, Sam?" Dr. Gable's voice came through, small but clear. "I got past the encryption. It's an identifier. It reads K9 Asset 07. Project code name, Cerberus." The air in the office went still. Wallace looked at Jack, whose face had become an unreadable mask of stone. The relaxed, easy posture he sometimes affected was gone, replaced by the coiled tension of a predator. "Jack," Wallace asked, his voice low. "It's DoD," Jack said, the words clipped and hard. "An unsanctioned R&D program from the early 2000s. Officially, it never existed. It was a black project designed to create the perfect K9 tracking unit. They used a combination of advanced training protocols, pheromonal agents, and experimental neurochemistry. The goal was to create a dog that could track a target through any environment with an absolute, unbreakable loyalty to its handler." "Unbreakable," Wallace repeated, a knot forming in his stomach. "That was the theory," Jack said, his eyes distant. "But the program was unstable. The side effects were unpredictable. Aggression, psychotic breaks. They couldn't control it. The project was shut down, buried under layers of classification. Everyone involved was reassigned, their records scrubbed. Cerberus was supposed to be a ghost. A ghost that had just tried to kill one of Wallace's deputies on the mountain." "We need to know more," Wallace said, the course of action clear in his mind. "We need to know who was involved." Jack shook his head. "Official channels will get you a dead end, Sheriff. This is too deep, too dirty. Anyone you ask will deny everything. So what do we do? For the first time since they'd met, Jack pulled out his own burner phone, a simple, featureless device. He scrolled to a single, nameless contact. "We go unofficial," he said. He pressed the call button. The phone was answered on the first ring. Jack didn't say hello. "Archivist, this is Pathfinder," he said, using old call signs like relics from another life. "I need a ghost story. Project Cerberus." The voice on the other end was raspy, belonging to a man who had spent too many years in smoky back rooms. There was a long pause, then a dry chuckle. "Cerberus, you're digging in a graveyard, Pathfinder. That one's got a monster in it." "I know," Jack replied. "I think I just met it. I need a list of handlers. Specifically, who was in charge of Asset 07. "That's deep," the voice rasped. "It'll cost you." "Put it on my tab," Jack said and ended the call. He looked up at Wallace, who had watched the exchange with a mixture of awe and apprehension. The sheriff, a man who had built his career on search warrants and due process, was now a willing accomplice in a back-channel conversation that bordered on treason. But he saw the look in Jack's eyes. This was the only way. "The archivist?" Wallace asked. "An old friend," Jack said, the explanation deliberately vague. "He finds things that don't want to be found. He'll get us a name." The call came 12 hours later, tearing through the dead silence of a motel room that smelled of pine-scented cleaner and stale air. It was 3 a.m. Jack Corrigan was wide awake, sitting in a chair facing the door, a habit ingrained from years of sleeping in hostile territories. His burner phone vibrated once on the nightstand, a silent, urgent summons. Sheriff Wallace was asleep in the other bed, his steady, weary snores the only sound in the room. They had decided to stay close, a makeshift command center for an investigation that had no official name. Jack picked up the phone. "Pathfinder," he said softly. The archivist's voice crackled on the line, a ghostly whisper of static and smoke. "The ghost has a name. Elias Vance." Jack felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold outside. He'd heard the name before, spoken in hushed tones in intelligence circles. A cautionary tale, a boogeyman. "Lead handler and field commander for Project Cerberus," the archivist continued, his voice as dry as turning file pages. "Brilliant man, a true believer. Designed most of the training protocols himself. He was paired with Asset 07, your dog, for the final field trials. They were the program's star pupils." "What happened to him?" Jack asked, his voice low. A dry, mirthless laugh. "The official story? Vance got sloppy. There was a lab accident at the primary research facility, a remote complex in Nevada, a containment breach during the synthesis of a new chemical they were working on, codenamed Acheron, a hypervolatile neurotoxin. Vance and his family, wife and daughter, were on site. The official report says they were all killed in the exposure. The project was deemed too unstable and the whole thing was buried under a mountain of black ink." Jack's hand tightened on the phone. The foam on Elena's lips, the pinpoint pupils. Acheron. It was the same poison. "What's the unofficial story, archivist?" The voice on the other end dropped even lower, becoming conspiratorial. "The unofficial story is that the program was failing spectacularly. The dogs were becoming unstable, and Vance was about to blow the whistle. He believed the training was inhumane, the neurochemistry too unpredictable. The accident, so the whispers go, was no accident at all. It was a cleanup. The agency took care of a liability and buried its sins in the same fire. Vance believes they murdered his family to ensure his silence." "Believes," Jack seized on the word. "Past tense. The file says he's dead." "Pathfinder," the archivist rasped. "You and I both know that in our world, ghosts have a habit of walking. Be careful. Elias Vance isn't just a rogue operative. He's a man who lost everything. Men like that don't just want revenge. They want to burn the whole world down." The line went dead. Jack sat in the darkness, the name echoing in his mind. Elias Vance, a ghost armed with a phantom poison, back to haunt the world that tried to erase him. The next morning, the sunlight that filtered into Elena's hospital room had a deceitful cheerfulness. She was sitting up, an untouched breakfast tray on the table beside her. Her physical recovery was slow but steady, but her mind was a maze of frustrating dead ends. The voice, the smell of ozone. They were locks without keys. Sheriff Wallace entered, followed by Jack. Wallace gave her a gentle smile, but she could see the strain in his eyes. Jack remained near the door, a silent, watchful presence. "Elena," Wallace began, pulling up a chair. "We have a name. I need to know if it means anything to you. Elias Vance. Elena's reaction was instantaneous. The color drained from her face. The name wasn't just familiar. It was a lightning bolt that shattered the fog in her mind. Fragmented memories slammed together with brutal force. Vance, she whispered, her voice trembling. Oh God, Elias. Jack stepped forward. You knew him? She looked from Jack's intense gaze to Wallace's worried face. I knew him years ago, before I moved to Marquette. I was on a joint task force for domestic terrorism. He was our liaison from the DoD. He was brilliant, intense. Always seemed like he was carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. Her eyes unfocused, staring at a memory that was now horrifically clear. He had a dog with him, a German shepherd. He called him Ragnar. It was the most incredible animal I'd ever seen. Smart, disciplined, fiercely loyal to Vance. They were inseparable. A single, hot tear traced a path down her cheek. The pieces were all there, a puzzle she never knew she was a part of. After the task force was disbanded, I heard there was an accident, she continued, her voice thick with emotion. That he and his family had died. I couldn't believe it. A few months later, an animal welfare agency contacted me. They said a police-trained K9 had been found abandoned, its records mysteriously wiped. They asked if my department could take him. It was Ragnar. She looked toward the window as if she could see the ghost standing there. I thought I was giving him a second chance, a new life. I never knew his past would come back to kill us. The terrible truth settled over the room, cold and heavy. Ragnar wasn't just a rescue K9. He was Asset 07. And the man who had trained him, the man who had been his entire world, was the same man who had left them both to die on that mountain. The voice, Elena whispered, her eyes wide with horrified recollection. It was his. When he found us on our patrol route, Ragnar was overjoyed to see him. His tail was wagging. And then Vance, he spoke to him, a single word in German, and Ragnar just sat. He wouldn't move. He wouldn't protect me. A double betrayal. A wound deeper than any physical injury. Vance had used the dog's absolute loyalty, a bond he himself had forged, as a weapon against them. He said he was sorry, Elena choked out, the memory now vivid. He said the world needed to see the truth of what they did to him, to his family, and that our pain was a necessary message. Jack's face was grim. The archivist was right. This wasn't just revenge. This was a crusade. And Elena and Ragnar had been the opening sermon. Elena's revelation changed everything. The assault was no longer a simple, brutal act of personal revenge. It was a statement, an overture. And as Jack Bennett stood in the sterile silence of the hospital room, he knew with a cold certainty that the main act was yet to come. A message? Sheriff Wallace muttered, pacing the small space by the window. What kind of message requires poisoning one of my deputies and her dog? Jack's gaze was fixed on the storm-swept treetops visible outside. The kind that guarantees you get the world's attention, he said, his voice low and hard. He didn't pick Elena randomly. He picked a law enforcement officer, a symbol of the system he believes betrayed him. He's telling us he can touch anyone, anywhere. It's a demonstration of capability. Elena, pale but resolute in her hospital bed, added her own insight. The summit, she said, her voice raspy but clear. The Great Lakes Economic Summit at the Grand Mackinac Resort. It starts in 2 days, world leaders, financial titans, a massive media presence. If he wanted to send a message. Her words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken horror. An attack on the summit would be catastrophic. Wallace stopped pacing, his face ashen. That's federal jurisdiction. We've been on the periphery of the security planning for weeks. And that's exactly why he'll strike here, Jack countered, turning from the window. He knows the federal agencies are focused on the primary target, the resort itself, the security perimeter. He won't hit the summit directly. It's too predictable. He'll hit the foundation, its lifeblood. The water, Wallace breathed, the single word landing like a stone. The resort has its own discrete water supply, drawn from the straits and treated at a private processing facility on the island, Jack explained, his mind racing, putting together the tactical pieces. It's a closed loop, a vulnerable system. He could poison thousands without firing a single shot. The hypothesis was terrifying, but it fit Vance's profile perfectly. A clean, terrifyingly efficient attack that would send shockwaves around the globe. He wouldn't be a simple terrorist. He would be the ghost who poisoned paradise. The problem was, it was still just a theory. They had no proof and no location for Vance. The outside world, including the federal agencies descending on the area, knew nothing of Cerberus or Acheron. To them, this was a single, albeit brutal, assault on a local cop. Their fragile, secret investigation was immediately complicated by the arrival of the FBI. The lead was a man who seemed genetically engineered to be an obstacle. Special Agent Nolan Pierce. Pierce was sharp, wore a perfect suit that looked out of place in the rugged North Woods, and carried the condescending air of an Ivy Leaguer. His hair was perfectly styled, and his cool, analytical gray eyes seemed to assess everything based on its potential to advance or impede his career. He met them in Wallace's office, taking in the small-town atmosphere with a barely concealed smirk. "Sheriff Wallace," he began, his voice smooth and authoritative. "The Bureau will be taking the lead on all security arrangements for the summit. Naturally, the assault on your officer is a matter of concern, but we need to ensure local issues don't distract from the main objective." Wallace stood his ground, his weary face set like granite. "With all due respect, Agent Pierce, I believe this local issue is the main objective. We have reason to believe the attacker is planning something much bigger." Pierce waved a dismissive hand. "We've reviewed the file. A disgruntled local, most likely. We'll handle it. As for your civilian consultant," he added, his eyes sweeping over Jack with open suspicion, "his presence in an active investigation is irregular. I suggest he enjoy the rest of his vacation." The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Wallace was about to retort when Jack's burner phone vibrated in his pocket. A single text message, a set of coordinates. It was from the archivist. Jack met Wallace's eyes and gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. It was time to move. "Agent Pierce," Wallace said, his voice deceptively calm. "We appreciate the FBI's diligence. We'll be sure to forward any new information we uncover." It was a polite but firm dismissal. Pierce left, clearly unconcerned, confident the local sheriff would fall in line. The moment he was gone, Wallace turned to Jack. "What do we have?" "A possible location," Jack said, showing him the coordinates. "An old, decommissioned logging camp deep in the Escanaba River State Forest. It's been off the grid for years. No power, no water, no way to track it. It's the perfect place for a ghost to set up a lab." They moved quickly and quietly, bypassing official channels. They drove out in Wallace's unmarked personal truck. The silence between them was filled with a shared sense of urgency. As they navigated the snow-covered Forest Service roads, Jack's respect for the old sheriff grew. Wallace was a man bound by duty and the law. Yet here he was, willing to bend the rules when he knew lives were at stake. The logging camp was a ghost of a place, a dark shape against the snow-laden pines. It was silent, isolated, and from the outside, looked completely abandoned. But Jack's trained eyes saw the signs. A set of fresh tire tracks nearly erased by the wind. A faint, almost invisible wisp of smoke from a stone chimney. They approached on foot, weapons drawn, moving through the trees like wraiths. Jack took the lead, his movements fluid and silent. He motioned for Wallace to cover the rear as he approached a grimy window. He peered inside. The interior was a nightmare of homemade science. Cables were covered in beakers, tubes, and a complex distillation system hooked up to a small, portable generator. On a corkboard on the wall was a large, detailed schematic of the Grand Mackinac Water Treatment Facility with red circles marking the intake valves. Beside it was a calendar. Today's date was circled. Beneath it, a single, chilling word was written: absolution. And on a small cot in the corner was a worn leather jacket, the very one Elena had described. Vance was here. Or he had been, very recently. They breached the door. The cabin was empty, but the air was thick with the same sterile, ozone-like smell Elena had remembered. The generator was still warm. On the main workbench, a single glass vial sat in a cooling rack. It held a clear liquid, a modified, weaponized version of Acheron designed for rapid dispersal in water. "He's ready," Wallace said, his voice a horrified whisper. "He's going to do it today." Before they could process the full horror of the discovery, the sound of approaching vehicles echoed through the woods. Within minutes, the cabin was surrounded by black SUVs, their flashing lights painting the trees in strobing reds and blues. Agent Pierce stepped out of the lead vehicle, his face a mask of cold fury. He'd obviously had them followed. "Sheriff Wallace," he yelled, his voice amplified by the silent woods. "You are compromising a federal investigation. This scene is now under the jurisdiction of the FBI. Both of you, step away from the building." Wallace stood firm in the cabin's doorway, his old service pistol held loosely at his side. He looked from the vial of poison on the table to the arrogant federal agent in the snow. He had a choice to make. Follow procedure and lose precious time, Or trust the rogue SEAL beside him and risk everything to stop a ghost? Not a chance in hell, the old sheriff said, his voice ringing with newfound resolve. This is my county. The standoff at the logging camp was a frozen tableau of authority versus necessity. Agent Pierce's voice was sharp with outrage, while Sheriff Wallace stood like an old oak, unmoving and defiant. For a moment, it seemed the greatest obstacle to stopping Vance was the very system designed to uphold the law. Jack Corrigan ignored them both. His focus was singular, his mind already dissecting the scene inside the cabin. This wasn't just a lab. It was a stage. Everything was too perfect, too clean. The vial of poison left so conveniently. The schematics on the wall. It was all a little too easy. A ghost like Elias Vance was never careless. While Pierce and Wallace traded verbal blows, Jack moved to a dusty laptop left on a small table. It was password protected, but the screen was still illuminated, displaying a complex chemical equation. It looked like the formula for Acheron, but scattered within the formula were numbers and letters that didn't belong.